So I thought today what we'd talk about is how live should Eurovision be? Obviously, we've gone from a position of Eurovision being an entirely live competition with an orchestra and backing singers, and even in the early days, people playing instruments live on stage. And we've gradually gone away from that. We got rid of the orchestra in 1999. Backing vocals are
What are
now
we
on
doing
tape.
here?
Sorry?
What are we doing here?
We're talking about Eurovision.
What's that?
Sorry about that. We'll keep that in the edit. So we're talking about how we've lost the orchestra. Backing tracks now going onto tape. There's talk about the singers using auto-tune. So in general, what are people's views of how live music has changed at the Eurovision and how it's sort of heading in what's the sort of future directions? What are people's...
I got distracted by the existential question of what is Eurovision.
That's a podcast in itself. But maybe the next podcast series is just me educating a random American about Eurovision in a sort of Louis Theroux sort of way.
Absolutely. But your question is what do we think about the reduction in the liveness of Eurovision? Is that right?
Yeah. And what does the future hold? I think is
I think it's really interesting. I mean, like most people, I'm sure who are fans here, bemoan the loss of the orchestra and the loss of we quite like and enjoy the quirky rules, don't we? The rules about all of the backing vocals have to be live and all that kind of stuff that we used to have, and now we are allowing things to be on track. What I do think it is, though, is I think it's a reflection of broader musical trends within popular music, where we accept or even expect perhaps things to be a bit less live, or a bit of a hybrid model of live, where we accept things like auto-tune or tuned vocals to be the norm, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was something that kind of a bit of live tuning became more common practice in Eurovision. I don't necessarily agree with it, because I think the dramatic staging of the show and the liveness of it and the vulnerability in an imperfect vocal is what really allows an audience to connect to a vocal, and it's almost like theatre compared to other things. But we've had things like Top of the Pops and things in the past where there's lots of which is a UK show where everyone was miming but had the kind of the guise or the kind of visuals of a live performance. So I'm sorry I'm throwing a lot in there, but I think it's
it's great.
It's a really good question, and I don't know what the answer is.
You said about those of us who sort of bemoan it. Why do you think we do? I mean, because the orchestra's been gone for 25 years now. The backing vocals are going onto tape, and we as fans sort of accept it. Why do you think it's important to us that we keep sort of these live elements? Or those of us who want us to keep them anyway?
You're right in posing that question, because it's wrong of me to assume that we all agree with that. Personally, I'm a trombone player and I love the orchestral sound, and I think there is a slight nostalgia personally, but I think nostalgia generally is a big cultural phenomenon. Whether it's Stranger Things having a very 80s aesthetic or whatever it is, whether it's the 80s musical sounds that we hear in pop music now, the 80s drum beats and things like that. We all have a kind of a nostalgic look back, and things were always better in the past, and modern music will never be good enough, in some ways, because people always, valorize what's come before. The Beatles, Elvis, all these amazing things in the past, and modern music's never good. This modern rubbish, I guess in some ways that kind of attitude might play into it.
Carrying on from that, you talk about sort of nostalgia. Why do we like the orchestra? I'll give my opinion as to why I like it. I used to find it fascinating, the difference between the studio recording of a song that was put into the Eurovision and how the orchestra tackled it. I think there were songs that were greatly enhanced that had a crappy studio track, and if you think about going back into the 80s, something like Roger Benz in 85, I think the orchestra, the string section of that song and that middle eight is perfect. And then you listen to my illegally downloaded MP3 of the song, and it's a sort of synthesized string track. It just doesn't have that sort of power. And I think even nowadays, if you look at songs such as Fear og Flam from Denmark last year, Denmark had a live orchestra, and again, that sort of string and brass section, I think, sort of really helped the song along. Do modern audiences want that? Do they care? Do they? Is it, you know, this is something that we get very excited about because we know how it used to be. But do you think it matters to the sort of the modern viewer whether a song sounds different from how it goes out on a I was going to say CD then, but how it goes out as a single?
Okay. I love France 1985. I'll just start with that. I love, 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 love that song. And can we also mention Denmark 1989? The conductor stunt was, I don't think we'll ever get to see that again. For me, how I see it is that we are like the very, very small group of people who have watched Eurovision in the old days and the modern Eurovision. There are many people who watch Eurovision in the old days and don't watch them anymore. And even one of the members of ABBA, I think, said that they don't like modern Eurovision. And most people who are watching Eurovision right now will probably not care about Eurovision in the past. So I feel like we are just like the very small part of both groups of viewers.
The bigger point for me is this a song contest where we are saying who has written the best song this year? In which case we could really judge it on MP3s if we really wanted to. Or how much does the performance of a song matter? Now, obviously, Eurovision has increased in terms of dancing and pyrotechnics and costumes and things to perhaps 20, 30 years ago. But the ability to actually perform a song live on stage and assuming you just said it there, that sort of drama of performing a vocal live. Should the performance of a song and how it's interpreted add to the overall result, or is this purely which songwriter has written the best song? In which case, sort of the performance, the perfect studio produced track should be the thing that we care about.
Can I just sort of like go a slightly off topic since you mentioned songwriters? I feel like there is a lot of more focus on the songwriters rather than the performers. Back in the early days, a big bonus if the performer is also a songwriter. In the case of, let's say, like France 70 and 83, for example. But it seems like nowadays, no one really focuses as much on the songwriters as they do with the performers. Maybe that's just how I see it.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think the songwriters used to win a trophy or medallion or whatever, and now the big glass microphone goes to the singer of the song. So no, I think you're right that we've moved a lot away from that. I mean, if you remember, if anyone ever watched the old Song for Europe, there was always 4 medals for the songwriting team and the winning artist.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Maya was saying there. Really, I also think, you know, the performance, the performance element, and what it's morphed into is quite similar to what we've become accustomed to on TV with TV talent shows, with the exception of maybe The Voice, where The Voice does have a bit of a live band, doesn't it? And people singing live. But a lot of TV talent shows, you know, whether it's X Factor, the Got Talent franchise, or anything like that, or American Idol, Pop Idol, it's all about people singing live to a track, and people have become very accustomed to that. Backing vocals on the track, all that kind of stuff. So I think the focus on, you know, one main person, maybe some backing dancers, is part of where I think popular culture has morphed to, maybe.
And again, do you think we talked about this last week, the idea of casual viewers, the sort of the people who enjoy Eurovision on a Saturday night in May, are they voting based on what they just think is the best song, or do they take, you know, if you're making a decision on who to televote for, are you going to penalise a missed note, for example, or are you just saying, well, actually, this is just a good song that this person sort of slipped a note on?
Well, that kind of takes us to Gemini Crybaby, doesn't it?
I mean, that depends on whether you think that was a well-written song, if she performed it, if they performed it well on the night.
It's an interesting example because it had some chart success as a purely recorded song. It was in a period where we had our own Melodifest, and it was selected, wasn't it, as our entry, and you know, and so it's had chart success in a few territories, and you know, it's so as a song, it's perfectly. I mean, it's very of the time, isn't it? But it's perfectly it was perfectly listenable to. It's got a really good melody. I think that it's got a lot going for it. The live performance, was literally as you described it, wasn't it? It was bad notes, and they were penalised for bad notes.
I mean, they tried to blame the Iraq War, but I'm not sure that was the right answer at the time. But
can I just sort of like mention that many of the time, most casual viewers, the first time they hear a song is when it is performed on stage. I do think the casual viewer may be less likely to penalize the song, but at the same time, they're probably more difficult to impress.
So why is it that quite a few of us are really wanting an orchestra to come back? Because as we've established that I think the casual viewers won't care that much. Is it that sort of that we want nostalgia, or is it that we think that the songs are somehow enhanced with live instruments and things, or is it that, again, is it just some sort of yearning for the past and that's how it used to be and it looked very nice and having conductors and things, or what?
In my opinion, and this is probably only speaks for me, a lot of the songs that I love are songs that go well with the orchestra. Mm-hmm. So let's say if I say like my top 3 favorite songs of all time from the whole 1,600 Eurovision songs. So they are Yugoslavia 1967, and there's like a trumpet solo. This trumpet solo is like probably the best part of the song. Another song I really like is Norway 1966, and she was playing a guitar, and even nowadays you can't even play guitar live on the show. Yeah. And I love France 1970. You can't play a piano live on the show anymore. Sorry, I'm just saying it's just that the songs that I really like sort of needs the orchestra to be there. Without it, it just feels very flat. Imagine like Norway 1966 without the live guitar and without that part where the orchestra just sort of like flows into there. Like I just can't imagine it without that part.
I think there's a lot of songs from the 80s that went out as singles that were produced in studios and did not have that sort of quality song. I mean, you and I both have a favourite song in Scott Fitzgerald, but we can probably agree that the 7-inch single version does not have the same drama that the RTE orchestra provided on the night.
Go needs the orchestra to be what it is. Without the orchestra, it's not Go. It doesn't feel like Go.
Exactly,
and
even because obviously there's a number of versions of Go that have gone out on vinyl, but even the one that tries to sound like the orchestra fails miserably. But just coming back to it, you're talking about sort of live performances and trumpet solos, and that brings me on to Greece 1991, when a stray saxophone player essentially ruined an entire song, or some people would say it did. So again, is that a reason for not doing it, that the fact that it is live? And if you are a performer and a songwriter, you are relying on a professional orchestra to do a job for you. And if you read some of the stories on the Conductor Is website, there are stories of conductors who've got the timing wrong and who've set the tempo wrong and things. And as a performer and as a songwriter, should you have to put up with that? Is that one of the reasons why we shouldn't do it?
I feel like, honestly, if you're the performer, it sucks if that happens, but there are so many times where it didn't happen, and I feel like the benefit sort of outweighs the risks in that case. I feel like Greece 1991 is more of an exception rather than the norm.
If you take Bandido, for example, from Spain in 90, I mean, obviously that was backing track failure, which has never actually happened since. But do you think Bandido's position in the jury vote was enhanced by the fact that they got a second go at it, or worsened by it?
I feel like that would have been the rank they would have gotten regardless. I feel like 1990 was quite strong here, and I can see, at least from the perspective of someone watching it back then, why songs number 1, 2, 3, and 4 were songs number 1, 2, 3, and 4. I feel like, at least in my opinion, I feel like the backing track failure didn't. In my opinion, I don't think it affected their placement at all. even if that didn't happen, I feel like fifth place is something that is very reasonable for them.
I mean,
Obviously, everyone's probably going to have a different opinion, and Bandito is also quite a fan favorite. So I feel like many people will have an opinion different from me, but for me, I feel like.
But it's interesting that actually in all of these years we haven't really had a sort of backing track breakdown, whereas there was the real possibility that the orchestra might get it wrong. And I'm just going to move on for a second. Obviously, a lot of the modern sort of viewers and fans prefer backing tracks and they prefer it not to be done on an orchestra. Why do you think it is that some people prefer Eurovision to be done as a backing track competition, but then will also massively enjoy the Sanremo contest, which is entirely orchestra based and almost an entirely live competition? Denmark and their Melody Grand Prix has a band. And as you've said, as Simeon said, there are programs like The Voice that has a band. I mean, even in Britain, even the Sports Personality of the Year has an orchestra. So it's a bit strange that we sort of Sanremo, which is in recent years has become a firm favourite of the national final season, has this entirely live attitude, and then we go to Eurovision where it's very much done in the melodifest mold.
I guess not using the orchestra and doing like what Eurovision is doing right now with a backing track allows for like a more, let's say, like more modern kind of music, more like pop, electronic, electro pop, dance pop, something the orchestra couldn't provide. However, I feel like because I don't know if I'm wording it right, but I feel like within the Eurovision stage versus the Sanremo stage, the variety of song was quite different. The Eurovision stage arguably has more variety, therefore having an orchestra that has to like adapt and adjust to like all these different genres of song may not be as feasible as Sanremo, and also for the average viewer, they don't watch a national final, so they don't actually have anything to compare. So I think they're just happy with what is shown that night. But we're not the average viewers.
I'm not sure I agree with you about Sanremo. I think, there's 25 songs in a night. The broad range of songs played, from traditional Italian songs all the way up to sort of modern pop. I mean, I think we can all agree that Måneskin is enhanced massively by the orchestra. Ciao Ciao last year as a sort of popular, almost disco style track, I think again did well having an orchestra go along with it. And I think, again, I think Anders Berglund, one of the Swedish conductors, he said that, modern orchestras can do modern music, and the Metropole, for example, should be able to handle this sort of thing alongside backing tracks.
But yeah, I mean, the orchestral sound is still there, isn't it, in some Eurovision songs? Whether it's Rise Like a Phoenix or even Hold Me Close, from last year. There's lots of songs that have a very orchestral sound to them, but there's also the kind of the contemporary issue of high production value, where we're not just got like follow spots and like a lighting designer cueing things like on the fly in that same live experience, that we can't have like the wrong tempo from the conductor in the orchestra, because actually there's a whole kind of audio visual element that is triggered by certain things in the track, and they're perfectly synced together. And so I guess the fancier it's got as a visual feast has kind of made it maybe a practical necessity to do away with the risk of having a live orchestra on top of it.
And what do we think about moving away from the orchestra but carrying on with playing instruments? Actual acts playing their own songs and playing their own instruments. Orza Cleveland played her own guitar in the 60s. I think Johnny Logan's saxophonist was live. I think it's a bit ridiculous that the Shadows, where Hank Marvin, arguably one of our finest guitarists, was sort of forced to mime his guitar solo. Again, do we think there is a place for bands doing it live and taking that risk themselves of playing their own instruments?
Yeah, I mean, hi, good evening, everyone. Yes, I think my view is that I think the battle of bringing the orchestra back has been lost, and I think as the years pass, I think I sound probably more and more outdated by saying it should come back. So I think I've kind of accepted it won't come back, but I think absolutely there should be a right that if an artist, let's say, I forgot Mia from Croatia this year, who wants to play her, if she wants to play her guitar, then why wouldn't she be allowed? She should be allowed, because it comes back to your point about the orchestra going wrong. But if someone's actually on stage playing their own instrument, then they're sort of in control. You know what I mean? It's if it all goes wrong, it's their fault. And that issue of someone coming in like a dodgy saxophonist is gone. So I mean, I think to me, the ideal solution, the best way forward would be accept the orchestra's gone, but if somebody wants to play piano, guitar, or whatever, then they should be allowed to. I think there shouldn't be a complete ban. I think to me that would be almost a good resolution, wouldn't it? Because it would kind of maybe please people who want live music, and also those who don't want the orchestra and think it's outdated would hopefully be happy as well.
I mean, my understanding of why the orchestra went, and I've taken a lot of this from the And the Conductor Is website, was that the German delegation in the mid-90s suddenly decided that the contest needed to modernise or die, and were threatening to pull out. And I think part of it was that they, in 1996, they obviously famously didn't qualify in the pre-qualifying round, and they had a fairly, of its time, sort of, I don't know if techno is the right word, but had a very sort of up-tempo sort of dance track that didn't qualify and probably wouldn't have come across very well with an orchestra. And I think the German head of delegation was essentially saying, you need to modernise or the contest will die. Do you think that's the case, that the contest would have died or do you think the orchestras would have found ways to get around it? Like I say, and there are people in the Metropole Orchestra, and there are people such as Anders Berglund who thinks that the modern orchestra can cope with modern music. Do you think they could have done, or is it just better that you'd have it done on a studio track?
I don't think the contest would have died in the 2000s. I mean, I do think maybe it needed a bit of a shake-up, but I mean, there's other ways to shake up the contest and bring it into sort of maybe more modern times. I mean, I read that one of the reasons as well it was removed was because this was the late 90s. It was the time when we started having the Eastern European countries coming through. One of them winning was probably going to happen fairly soon, and I think there were concerns about the fact that it would just bring extra expense to these countries, maybe only independent a couple of years, and maybe they didn't have sort of the finance, and it was just a way of reducing costs. Which, I mean, that kind of makes sense. But I think there were other reasons, other than the Germans kind of wanting the contest to be modernized. But I think while the expense one makes sense, I think the contest wouldn't have died if the orchestra had stayed. Absolutely not. I mean, I know the rules changed in '97 to bring the tracks out restriction, but surely that was again a good medium, in that if you wanted to have your song completely backing track without having anyone on stage miming instruments, then you could do that. And if you wanted an orchestra, then you could do that too. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the contest would have died if the orchestra had said no. I mean, it wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think it would have carried on, and I think even the threat of a German withdrawal wouldn't have affected it. And interestingly, Germany's next entry in 1997 was a very Zeit was a very orchestra friendly song. So I think to say that the Germans were, I think it's not true to say that the Germans were suddenly sending loads of modern pop and they couldn't facilitate it with an orchestra. So I'm not entirely sure about that. And Germany's more recent run of form would suggest that they're not keeping up either. That's my view anyway. Let's move on to talk about the backing vocals. Now, obviously, the rules on backing vocals have changed over the years. I think originally, in the 57 contest, you weren't allowed any, and then the rules gradually changed on that. And finally, we've settled for many years on having 6 people on stage who can sing and dance. And then gradually there has been a removal of backing vocalists off the stage. And then with COVID coming along, the EBU said that in order to reduce delegation sizes, we should put them all onto tape. What are people's views about sort of removing vocalists and sticking them on the track?
Terrible. I think the problem is, I think if the EBU had been upfront, was it in June 2020, and when they made the announcement about the backing vocalists, and they said, okay, we're going to allow pre-recorded backing vocals, and this will ensure there will be a contest regardless of COVID in 2021. That's a lie. It was had they just been a bit more open, because the thing is, if they really wanted to make the contest more COVID-proof and have less people on stage and small delegations, then they would have said, yeah, pre-recorded backing vocals, and you can only have 2 dancers on stage, or some, But the fact that almost a lot of people in 2021 just replaced the backing vocalists on stage with dancers, it was just a lie, wasn't it? I mean, I don't think it was anything to do with COVID. It was that they wanted a way of getting maybe the rule changed, and COVID provided them with the perfect excuse.
So interestingly, we did some statistical work on this. There was a Dutch student who was doing her thesis on how COVID has affected live music, and I did some statistical work for her that Actually, there was a reduction in the total number of performers that turned up in 2021 and 2022 compared to 2018 and 2019. So the delegation sizes did get significantly smaller by 1 to 1.5 artists, if you can imagine half an artist. And I think the total number of people turning up to perform did reduce. But actually, there was still quite a large number of entries that were using 6 on stage. And I think you're right that we'd gone from 1 artist, 2 dancers plus 3 backing vocals to 1 plus 5 in those that did have the full 6. As a cost-cutting measure, as a safety measure, yes, it probably did reduce the total number of people that took part, but I think many countries just went... It seemed to me, the distribution seemed to be that you either had 1 or 2 people on stage, or you had 5 or 6 people on stage, but you didn't have that middle ground anymore, and as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I mean that sounds fair, but I mean I think that COVID was really the reason. Then there would have been a full ban, and it just would have been 1 on stage, or if you're a duo, or I think the fact that they allowed people still to have 6, it kind of made it a bit of the excuse to me a bit of a joke. But
yeah, is it what you're saying, that you think that we need to reduce the number of people on stage, but we're not going to actually reduce how many people can be on stage? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, I think if it was genuinely for COVID reasons, wouldn't they have just reduced the number of people on stage?
Mm-hmm.
And I really suspect that they just wanted the rule to come in, and they had a perfect opportunity to bring it in, and they had a really good excuse. Because I think they were able to say, well, if we don't bring this rule in, then there might be no contest in 2021. By bringing it in, we're definitely going to have a contest in 2021. And I think had anyone sort of gone, oh gosh, I mean, they better do this because we have to have a contest in 2021. So I think maybe I just kind of feel that whatever, I don't like the rule anyway, but I think the way they brought it in, just to me, I think it kind of felt a little bit like a lie. I could be wrong, and that's just my interpretation. And I think I might have preferred they were maybe just a little bit more upfront about why they were doing it. Because yes, I mean, obviously there was a COVID reason as well, but I think it's fair to say it wasn't the only reason. Yeah,
and I think you're right. Going back to previous points, that having 35 orchestra members is a cost to the broadcaster, but equally having a full, having 42 times 6 is a cost to individual delegations as well. And whether this was an attempt to try and reduce costs to everyone involved is a possibility. Just going back to the orchestra very briefly, for many years it was the case that the broadcaster could choose to have an orchestra, and Israel's argument for not doing it in 1999 was that there wasn't enough space on stage, and yet the venue was exactly the same as what they had in the 70s when they did have an orchestra. But that's by the by. Again, with the removal of backing vocals and putting them onto the tape, I mean, obviously Daddy Freya for Iceland used a choir of members of the public, so you can suddenly create more than 6 voices on your backing track if you want to. I think Daddy Freya's actually come out later on in favour against it, but I might be wrong on that. What do we... Does it uneven the playing field? I don't know if that's the right phrase, but have we made it unfair that perhaps the people with a good record label and a good publisher and a good studio who can create these tremendous choirs of powerful backing vocals can do so, and those on smaller budgets are finding that they can't? Have we made it more unfair for certain countries?
I feel like there is this element of fairness, but at the same time, pre-recorded backing vocals is a tool, and having it or not having it is not the decisive factor that makes a song good. If you can do it well, it can elevate a performance, given that Daddy Freya's song was quite accepted as like a great song, a good performance. But his backing vocals, his extensive backing vocals that had more than 6 people, I feel like it's just some sort of enhancement. Like, you cannot save an abysmal performance with a good backing vocal. And
tell about to Bell and the Devotions.
Oops. But yeah, I feel like it's just like it is just a tool. I don't think it is a necessary ingredient to make a good performance. And
But again, I'm sorry to interrupt. It comes back to that idea of you are taking risk out of the equation. You are reducing. A bad backing vocalist is the same as a poor saxophone player. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but there have been songs with sort of screechy backing vocalists or ones who've sort of been they've overpowered the vocal with what they're doing and things. So there is that possibility that the backing vocalists may go wrong. I just wonder, just coming back to my original question, is do we think then, if the UK entry next year has an entire men's Welsh voice choir on its track, is that fair compared to, I don't know, Moldova having very few people on the track, for example?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think maybe 20 years ago it would be super unfair, but I think we've seen huge levels of democratization in who can make music now and on what budget. And when you see the amount of people that, I mean, even 5 years ago, it was impossible for an unsigned artist to upload directly to Spotify their own music without going through an aggregator like CD Baby or something like that. But even now, you can record, you can make music on the GarageBand app or something on your phone. You can upload that. TikTok is full of people creating original content, original music. I mean, Sam Ryder came from TikTok. Obviously, he was signed fairly recently before he did Eurovision to Parlophone, but he was completely independent. And so I think that just demonstrates that actually how much cheaper it is to be creative, how much cheaper it is to have a high quality production value to your music. When you look at things like Billie Eilish, winning Grammy Awards from stuff made in her bedroom, not in multi-million-pound studios. So I think, the fairness question is definitely important to ask, but I wonder if it's really an issue in 2022 or if it's as big an issue.
No, I agree. I think that there will always be a lot of it is dependent on how much maybe the broadcaster or how much the record label is willing to throw at a thing. If you think of Dima Balan getting a Russian figure skater to turn up on stage, that probably cost the Russians a fair bit of money compared to someone else just getting a couple of dancers on stage, they're obviously very talented people, but you can change your performance based on how much money you're willing to throw at it. And I agree with your point that they can probably find creative ways of making the backing vocal as competitive as another country. Just going back to, I want to sort of talk a bit more about backing vocals. Obviously, there was a noticeable shift I felt in the last 10 years where we had live backing vocals, but they were off stage. And I remember, and most of us will remember the days of, 4 or 5 men and women stood in a line with microphones sort of swaying to the artist's song. And gradually we've sort of pushed them off stage and made them perform backstage and just have the sound go out with them. This is less about live music, but it's more about what appears on stage. Do we think that's fair? I always felt really sorry for the backing vocalists that were sort of... I liked the fact that they appeared on stage, and I think shoving them off stage and just hearing their voice was not a nice thing to do.
Hi, yeah.
Hello.
So basically about that, I think I just with backing vocals and stuff, I want transparency. I don't like it when they're hidden off to the side of the stage. I remember in 2014, I went to, where was it then? Copenhagen, that's it. And I was in the audience, I was to the side, so I could see the side stages really well. And I remember Tio was on singing his little cheesecake song, and he had a backing vocalist, and it was so far to the side. And it just felt so I don't want to say deceptive, but just I just, it doesn't vibe with me, because especially when we know juries vote on vocal ability. I want transparency as much as possible. And I think if you're going to use backing singers, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But don't hide them off to the side. It's a bit like the pre-recorded vocals. I don't particularly like them either.
Yeah.
I understood why it was done during COVID. And, there was creative things like Daddy's choir that came from it. But I don't think it needs to stay. We don't need to turn into the American Song Contest where, there was so much pre-recorded backing vocals and just lip syncing to tracks because it had no spirit to it. And that's the one thing Eurovision just encompasses, it's just spirit and that live element. And I'd hate to see that lost. We don't need to water it down.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there are certain times when you may have to. I think it'd be, if you think about Friend of a Friend by Lake Malawi, it would be a bit silly just having a person on stage just go, I'm only a friend, and then just disappear again. But yeah, I think in general, I just like seeing them on stage. I think they're part of the team. And that's the way I sort of view it. I don't know, again, what other people think. My view is that the artists and the backing vocalists and the dancers and in the old days the conductor. They're a team of people. And actually, same for the backing vocalists. You're a distraction. Off you pop to the back of the stage. Or to the side. It never sat right with me, and it still hasn't.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. It's definitely a trend I noticed. I wonder if it's a bit of a reflection of what Eurovision's perhaps become, whereas maybe it was a live performance music contest that happened to be televised, but now it's becoming increasingly a TV show that has some live performance elements, and so it does feel, like it's becoming closer to things like X Factor and things like that. There's a lot of high production value. There's a lot of cutaway video clips and things like that. There's it's losing some of those live aspects, and we all love those. We all love those as fans, but I think they really make it the event. So yeah, it's the high production is maybe making it very TV show. Like a lot of reality has become, the kind of semi-scripted reality TV show that's increasingly popular.
I was gonna say, like, you don't have to go back to the orchestra of the 80s. Just go back to Belgium 2015. There's just like a really good backing singers just had like a really good stage presence along with the performers, rhythm inside. By the way, that did pretty well for a good reason. I feel like you have to go back that far. I feel like Rhythm Inside just did everything well. The staging was just so good. The backing singers, the performance, everything. I feel like if you're gonna do it, like if at least if there's gonna be backing singers, at least get them like some stage presence, like how Belgium 2015 did.
I mean, just maybe this might be a silly question, so I do apologize. But I mean, I know offstage backing singers has always been something, but it's only really, as far as I can see, it's only really been in the last 10, even maybe 8-10 years that it's become really obvious. I mean, why has it become such a thing? Is it for sticks on stage reasons, and therefore it allows room for more dancers? Because personally, I don't see the point in having backing singers there singing live, but not having them on stage. Do you know what I mean? It's surely if they're there, they should just be on stage. I don't understand why. I mean, I'm assuming it's because, again, it's to allow more dancers or sound artists or acrobats or whatever. And by the way, I'd probably argue that the worst backing singer was probably Ole Ole 85, but I'm sure others will disagree.
My understanding was that the backing vocalists, even if they were behind the stage, still counted to the tally of 6. I don't think that it meant you could cheat the system and put more in.
Yeah, I actually thought that too. I thought it was the same, that the backstage, that the off-screen ones still counted, but I'm not entirely sure.
I thought it was, but maybe someone knows more than me about that. I mean, interestingly, if you look at, the classic example of the offstage backing singer from historically was Bellamy Devotions in '84, where there were 3 backing vocalists off stage. Now, the classic argument for that was that they were filling in for the Devotions, as it were, the 2 singers either side of Kit Rolfe, and that they were miming. But Paul Curtis did a podcast recently where he says absolutely not. Those 2 singers on stage with Kit Rolfe were singing, and the 3 behind the stage were just put there backstage, and that was it. And I think, again, there was another argument that one of them was heavily pregnant and we didn't want to be sort of seen on stage with a bump or something. That was one of the many rumours that I'd heard. But he swears blind that they were put backstage just to help the song along, but the actual Devotions were singing. And again, the interesting thing about the '84 competition is that they actually put and I think Greece did it as well when they hosted it. They put the backing singers on pedestals, on either side of the stage, so they were really prominent. And to me, it's a pity that they've gone so far backwards that they're just being pushed off stage.
Yeah, sorry, it was Kiev. Kiev had the 2 podiums on the sides of the stage.
Beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, having watched the contest numerous times in the last 2 weeks, it's Kiev.
Sorry, I was thinking of the Greek entry where you can see the man singing. But yeah, no, sorry, you're exactly lose a Euro point for me.
You mentioned Bell and the Devotions. The same actually applied for Bucks Fizz and Sweet Dreams. They had singers off stage as well. I think that was just the UK house style at that time.
Because the Song for Europe did the same. I mean, if you've watched any '80s Song for Europe's as religiously as I have, many of the singers performed on stage alone, but then the backing singers were live but not seen. In the same way that the orchestra was not seen, it was in another studio somewhere. So all of these changes and backing vocalists going off stage and disappearing and going onto track. Obviously, the biggest example prior to Eurovision of these things happening was at the Melodifest when they were putting vocals on the track, backing singers disappearing, many more dancers. They've got 8 people on stage. How much? I don't want this to turn into let's hate Sweden, because I think Sweden have done tremendous things in raising the profile of the contest. But how much can we thank or blame Melodifest for what the Eurovision has taken on? I appreciate that's a reasonably controversial question.
It seems almost that to me that Melodifest is becoming like almost a trial for innovations, if that's the right word to use, that will appear at the contest. They try them first. I think that's just my opinion again. It might just be a case of they implement them and then EBU notices and goes, yeah, we like that, let's bring it in. But I think maybe it's more a case of it's just used almost as a trial.
And if that's the case, do you think there's a time when Eurovision may come to a point where actually Melodifest has 8 on stage? Why don't we try that?
I think so. I think you could almost argue that what happened, not guaranteed, but I think you could make a fair argument that something that happens at MF could happen then 5 years later at the contest, which I think, as I was just thinking as you were speaking earlier on, if they ever announce at MF that lead vocals can become pre-recorded, then we need to buckle up, because it'll probably flow through to Eurovision in a couple of years later. But
the American Song Contest seemed to have unlimited people on stage, and again, I'll be honest, I watched Michael Bolton perform at the American Song Contest and didn't watch anything else, but I was aware that there were large numbers of people on stage for certain songs. Did anyone who did watch it feel that it was enhanced by having so many people?
I watched every single bit of the American Song Contest.
God bless you, you brave soul.
Yeah, and I don't think it was enhanced. It was so messy and just like headache inducing, and I don't know whether that's because it was like 3:00 in the morning for me, but it was too much. It was just too much.
So I think Mr. JDS just sort of brought up my sort of the final discussion point for tonight, which is we've talked about the orchestra going away, we've talked about bands not being able to play their instruments, we've talked about live performance going away, the backing vocalist going onto track, the backing vocalist being shunted off stage. Is the last taboo that we say the lead vocalist doesn't have to sing? And we've sort of seen it with the rumours surrounding Norway last year. Are we heading into a stage where actually we could say you can mime, you can use auto-tune, you can put you can put audio effects onto your song? Are we heading in that direction? And again, will it negatively impact on the contest if we do that?
I mean, I think we could be heading towards it, but not anytime soon. I mean, when the orchestra came in '99, and obviously it was a different time because there was no social media and a relatively small internet fandom, it was hard to maybe gauge reactions. I know people like Johnny Logan came out, and I know some people said online that it was likely that it was the beginning of the journey to actually going to full mime performances. So the fact that it took 22 years to go from backing tracks, well, not mandatory, but I guess compulsory orchestra, to pre-recorded backing vocals, that took 22 years. So I think it might be another 22 years, but I think it does feel that the contest, to me, it does feel the contest is on that path.
I do fear that it is going to go that way at some point in time. I think that will be the line in the sand for a lot of us, because I think that live vocals are part of the charm, And this year, you could say we had the delights of Pia Maria in the semi. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, we had Sam Ryder, whose vocals, arguably, live vocals added to the impact of Spaceman. I think it would be a line in the sand to me, definitely, if that ever came in.
Are you saying that if it went to a fully mimed contest, you would stop being a fan or stop watching?
I would still watch it for old time's sake, but it would be the last straw, as the saying goes. I think, yeah. It would be changed too many for me. I think as an oldie, yeah.
But again, that comes back to what I was saying at the very start of this: was that is this a who's written the best song competition, or is it a who's done the best song plus a great performance? And that's, do we reward the fact that a person hit a high note live more than if we just played a backing track where there was a high note?
I think so. I think it's both. I think it's a mixture. Personally, I don't know what other people think.
Because it's interesting with Josh DeBovie, when he briefly came to Twitter to talk about his experiences, he said that his song was forcibly raised by a semitone because Mike Stock wanted to create some controversy as to whether or not he could hit the high note or not, and I don't know what the hell they were thinking with that, but there's obviously some. We like the jeopardy of the fact that they might not do a good job. So where's the sort of, for the live singer, the person who's got to sing the bulk of the song? Where, I suppose you've talked about lines in the sand. What about autotune? Now I know autotune's been used in the past, but not to correct poor pitch, but it's been used for other sort of technical reasons. But if we started to use autotune to actually correct people's pitches, so they are singing but they're getting a lot of technical help, is that a line in the sand, or is that something we accept?
Personally, for me, I think it depends how they're going to use it. Because, I mean, in Sanremo, you'll often see people using, like, vocoders and stuff. Is that what they're called? Because that's, like, really popular at the moment in Italy. And maybe they're using it to mask, like, their vocal ability. But I also feel like it's a stylistic choice, which makes me feel, like, more lenient towards it.
Yeah.
And I feel like if Eurovision, wants to have music that's relevant to the markets these days, there's going to have to be some sort of give or take with that.
I mean, it's interesting with going back to the 90s. Was it Croatia that had a third of their points retrospectively removed because it turned out they had some electronic effect on the lead vocalist's voice, whereas now it's
1999. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Whereas now but I think even Grab the Moment for Norway, I think they had to try and recreate that. So I've done that appallingly, but they had to try and recreate that sort of electronic noise. Whereas I think now you can sort of get away with it more.
I think outside of Eurovision, we're surrounded by things that are presented as though they are live, but aren't live. And so, there's YouTube videos of bands who have recorded their track, but they'll still do a music video of them performing live, for example, or you'll see a cappella choirs who have recorded it and got it absolutely perfectly in tune, and then when they do their video of them performing it, they'll still put a microphone there that we can see, even though that microphone is not being used. So we are surrounded by media that hoodwinks us into thinking that there's a live performance, and even when it might not be. And I think I'd say most people can't tell when a vocal has been tuned or not. Obviously, when it's done in a T-Pain or Cher, Do You Believe in Life After Love kind of way, when it's used in a stylistic way, as Lily was kind of talking about, then it's obviously it's very blatant. But actually, there's a lot of subtle tuning throughout popular music now. So I guess we've become accustomed to that sound to the extent that we almost can't hear it anymore.
And that was where we ran out of time for another week. Thank you to everyone who took part. It was another great chat, and hopefully see you all in the next few weeks for another Euro-Versy. Goodbye.